This entitled mother and her family are causing havoc in public, but what they do to this poor woman in a wheelchair will make you lose hope in humanity. Happy birthday if today's your birthday, and on with the revamped show. A few years ago, I was living in Vegas, and an EM literally wheeled me away from my family. I have a number of health issues, and after a few botched surgeries and neurological damage, I was bedridden. I never left my house or bed except for doctor appointments. I hadn't been out at all for 2.5 years. I had worked really hard on my daily physical therapy, and my balance had greatly improved. My family came out for a visit, and I was so excited to surprise them with my improvements. I could stand and walk and was actually wearing pants. To celebrate, I wanted to go see the fountains at the Bellagio. For most people, this is a nice outing, but for me, this was years in the making. I was nervous I might get overtired and lost in the fast-moving crowds, so we had to bring my wheelchair. We knew the schedule for the fountains and arrived super early to secure a spot in the front where I could see from my chair. It was such an important moment for all of us. We lined up by the fence, and no sooner did the show start that I felt this jerking on my wheelchair. I thought maybe someone had tripped on me, and I immediately looked up to apologize. I was pretty self-conscious and ashamed of being out in a wheelchair in such a big crowd. When I glanced up to apologize, I see this woman with a small child on her hip, using one hand to literally pull me away from the fence. Because she was only using one hand, she spun me completely around to face the street. I was stunned. I could hear everyone reacting to the fountain show, and here I was looking dumb, awkwardly facing a bunch of strangers. I yelled for my husband, but he couldn't hear me over the noise. I looked behind me, and this woman had plopped her child up onto the guardrail, never made eye contact with me, never said one word to me, and had treated me like a piece of luggage. I tried to stand up, but the people around me had crowded me so much I didn't have room to push my chair back enough. I desperately looked around at the strangers in front of me, hoping someone who had seen what happened would help. It then dawned on me that this was a huge family friend group. They all began nudging me aside, further and further away from my family. It all happened so fast. I found myself pushing into the walking area where people who weren't stopping to watch the fountain show were quickly trying to walk past. People couldn't see me through the crowd and were stumbling over or past me. I couldn't see my family anymore and was trying hard to push myself up out of my chair the way my physical therapist had taught me. I feel someone grab my chair again, and I panicked. I started yelling, "No, please, no!" and then realized it was my husband. He had glanced to check on me and take a picture of me being out for the first time, and I was gone. He had to fight his way through the crowd, the same family group, to find me. I burst into tears. I don't know why, but it was like all the trauma from the last few years hit me all at once. I told him they had pushed me away, and after putting it together, my husband was ticked. He turned to this group of people and demanded to know who had pushed me away. By this time, the fountain show was pretty much over. The group initially just ignored my husband like they had me, until I pointed out the woman with her child as the culprits. My family confronted her, nicely I might add, and tried to explain why a wheelchair is an extension of a person, etc. She at first pretended like she didn't speak English, but I had heard from them talking amongst themselves in English while they pushed me into the walking area and told my husband as much. She then gave up that act and told my family about how I was in their way and probably couldn't see anyway, and the man with her claimed in a raised voice that in their country, they don't take their shameful family members out in public, to which my husband responded, "If that were true, none of you would be here." I was maybe even more shocked by his last sentence than being wheeled away. I managed the courage to tell him that what he said was bullcrap, and that I'm sure people in your country are actually kind and would be proud if I was their daughter. I remember the exact words I said because later I was very proud that I stood up to them. The group sort of collectively scoffed, spoke to one another quickly in what I think was Hindi, and slowly walked away as if nothing happened. We didn't stay for the next show because I just wanted to go home. I don't know which is worse, pushing a disabled person in a wheelchair out of your way or wrongly painting in your countrymen as prejudice. Imagine if someone was sitting in a chair and you just pushed the chair away to get past them. This is almost like that, but even worse because the person can't leave the chair, they need it as their mobility. I can't even begin to imagine the frustration of being stuck in a wheelchair, trying your best to actually finally rehabilitate so you you can go outside, only to have people like that show absolutely no respect for you as a person or your condition. Also, I would imagine something like that would technically be assault, but I am definitely no legal expert, so if you have some idea, let me know in the comments below. Okay, this happened about a month back. I regularly see my cardiologist every 3 months, and every 6 months I see the head cardiologist. Now, something you need to know about these two doctors in this story is that while they are cardiologists, they specialize in those with muscular dystrophy, MD. I have myotonic muscular dystrophy, MMD. They only see patients with MD, doesn't matter what kind, but they only treat those with the disease. They are great doctors, and most of my appointments have been through Blue Jeans, like Zoom but more secure. Now, I recently had a bad dizzy spell and nearly fainted with some bad chest pain, and I was well past the point where I was just adjusting to my medication, and when things like this happen, I am to alert them immediately. I left a message and they asked if I could come in for an examination. I was already feeling better by that point, but agreed to come in as I always listen to my doctors. My husband drove me to the hospital. The office was located in a hospital, but he unfortunately had to stay in the car as only patients were allowed inside, virus regulations. I had my temperature taken, given hand sanitizer, and a new mask before I was even allowed on the elevator. I'd been running a fever earlier, but it had thankfully subsided by now. I went to the cardiologist floor, and as soon as I walked in, I could hear a woman screaming at the receptionist. Now, this office is not very big, maybe 10 chairs in the waiting room, although I know there are 5 different cardiologists working from this check-in room. It was a bit small, but the hospital was under construction at the time, so hopefully it will be expanded. Anyway, the lady was screaming at the receptionist about having to wait over an hour, and she had yet to see any doctor. From what I heard from the receptionist, she was a walk-in and wanted someone to see her precious son immediately, as he was very fatigued. Walk-ins do happen. Technically, that's what I was at this time, even though they did know I was coming. I did not have a pre-established appointment. It's not often, but it does happen, and apparently she had just come in and started demanding to see the doctor immediately. If you are a walk-in, you are going to wait, and that's just how it is. Normal appointments sometimes take an hour to see the doctor, so she really needed to chill and wait as patiently as possible. Her kid looked to be about 16, maybe 17 or so. He looked okay, but I know that looks can be deceiving, as I looked okay but recently almost passed out. I went to the desk, checked in, and she handed me some paperwork to fill out. I wasn't able to fill out a pre-check-in form because I wasn't given one. I finished filling out my form and handed it in, and not 2 minutes later, a nurse came out to call me back, and I cringed hearing this woman practically scream. EP is entitled parent, and nurse, and me is me. "No!" she screamed at me and the nurse. "I've been waiting for over an hour already, seeing other patients come and go. It's my turn now. My son needs to see the doctor." If it's really urgent, she can go ahead of me. I've only been here a few minutes after all, I said, wanting to be helpful. "I'm sorry you've been waiting for so long, ma'am. What doctor are you needing to see?" she asked, remaining calm. "Dr. A. I need my son examined immediately. It's been too long already." "Oh, well, he is still with another patient right now. This young lady is seeing Dr. M, so she's not even seeing your doctor," she said. "I don't care. At this point, any doctor will do. Just let us go ahead of her. She doesn't even look sick. She even said she could wait." "Ma'am, according to your chart, your son does not have MD. Our Dr. M only sees patients with this specific condition. You need to sit down and wait for Dr. A to be available." She looked to me and told me to go down to waiting room 1 and not to worry, and he would see me shortly. I could still hear her screaming from down the hall, although the screaming eventually stopped and I waited to be examined. I did have an elevated heart rate, and although he was unsure what caused my fainting spell, he was glad to see I was much better now and gave me an injection and drew some blood to give me an EKG and sent me home with a heart monitor. Hate those bulky things. I don't know what happened to that lady, although I'm assuming she eventually was able to see her doctor, and I do hope that her son was okay. Kind of anticlimactic, I know, but she was just so ticked, and I've never seen her walk in upset about waiting before. Doctors usually know what they're doing. If they're not racing out to see you, then it's because it's not an emergency. You're not showing any signs of it being an emergency. Of course, sometimes there are mistakes and they don't pick up on things, but generally, if you're still breathing and conscious, you're gonna have to wait, especially if you're just coming in and you haven't made an appointment. What I find most frustrating though about doctor's appointments is that sometimes you have to wait an hour after your appointment time, but if you're even 5 minutes late for your appointment, then you are the most evil person ever. I don't know why they can't just work out beforehand how long your wait is actually going to be, and like send you a text message and say, hey, your appointment's actually more like going to be this time, so don't bother coming in yet. So I work in a plant research facility in my university. Specifically, we work with pepper plants. Outside of the main lab building, we have greenhouses where we grow plants for research. I was working in one of the greenhouses today because I needed to clear out some plants that were done producing for the season. These plants also had a virus that affects crop plants, known as tomato spotted wilt, so I needed to dispose them in organic waste so they could be incinerated and not pass the virus onto any other plant. There was also an African moringa tree in the greenhouse, not part of our research, but my lab manager was just growing it for fun. It was fine to be in the greenhouse with the infected peppers, as moringas cannot get tomato spotted wilt. I was transporting the pepper plants from the greenhouse to the organic waste bins at the edge of the facility, so I had the door unlocked so I can easily cart these plants out of the greenhouse. As I'm about to load another pot onto the cart, a family of 5 waltzes right into the greenhouse. A mother, a father, and 3 kids, not one of them wearing masks. There is also a sign on the door that says only 2 people max are allowed in the greenhouse. It's important to note that people who don't work in the facility aren't allowed in the greenhouses for obvious reasons. And also, you can't go into the greenhouse if you've interacted with outside plants that day. The reason for that is that you could potentially bring in bugs or pathogens that can harm the plants. Now, I don't know these people. I've never seen them at the lab or facility before, but I don't tell them to get out immediately. The reason for this is that I didn't know if they were affiliated with one of the lab members or if they were sent here by someone from another lab. Highly unlikely, but it's better to be safe than sorry. The exchange went as follows. ED is entitled Dad, EM is entitled Mum. Hi, can I help you?
Hey, I'm here to check on the moringa tree.
Do you work here?
Well, technically no, but I am in charge of the distribution of the moringa trees to the university.
Since he said he works with distribution, I figured he was legit and probably was sent here by my lab manager. I did find it weird how he wasn't wearing a mask and that he brought his entire family, however. As he is saying this, his 3 small children are running amok in the greenhouse, knocking over plant cages, touching the pots, and picking peppers off the plants. Neither parent is stopping them or scolding them. Excuse me, please don't touch the plants. The kids put down the peppers and stare at me, and this is when EM chimes in.
Why can't they touch the plants?
The plants are infected with a virus and I don't want it to spread.
A virus? Is it harmful to children?
No, but it harms plants, and I don't want them to spread it to other plants in the facility. EM sighs and calls her kids over to wait outside the greenhouse with her. The ED, paying no mind to the rest of his family, is fixated on the plants. He points to a pepper plant next to the moringa tree.
This moringa isn't looking so well. Are you taking care of it?
Me, confused. Sir, that's a pepper plant.
Oh, I see. The moringa tree isn't looking so well either though. You should transplant it to a bigger pot.
I explained to him that the moringa tree belongs to my lab manager and that he is taking care of it, not me. I just work with the peppers and I'm not responsible for the moringa. ED starts to explain to me about what to do to improve the moringa's health. He tells me about how much water it needs, what conditions it should grow in, how to transplant it, etc. I tell him thanks and I'll let my lab manager know, and I sort of shoo/escort him out. After I finished the task I was originally doing, I went back to the lab and asked my lab manager if he was expecting a gentleman to come and check on the moringa tree. He said no, and I explained to him that a man and his whole family came into the greenhouse. His eyes widened immediately and he asked if it was the black family with 3 kids. I said yes. He told me that a few weeks ago this family had tried to come into the lab before, but since we don't allow unauthorized people to come here, they were told they couldn't come in. situation. They told my lab manager that they just needed to use the bathroom and that they would be quick. My lab manager apologized and said that nobody except the workers were allowed into the building for security reasons and that he was sorry, but they couldn't come in. They then became angry and accused my lab manager of being racist and told him that he was only doing this to them because they were black. My lab manager ended up having to spend 2 hours defusing the situation. While he was talking to this family, I guess my lab manager was explaining to them the kind of plants we grow here and mentioned a moringa tree in the greenhouses. I asked if he had gotten this moringa tree from the man because the man had claimed he was in charge of distributing these trees. My lab manager said no, he got it from the university. So basically, this man had absolutely no business in the facility and was not associated with anyone who worked here. He just wanted to see the moringa tree, I guess. I'm still really confused. In the end, nobody was hurt and the plants are all fine, and I'm still annoyed and confused. My lab manager told me I handled the situation well and that he was glad I didn't confront them or tell them they couldn't be here because they probably would have accused me of being racist as well and complained to the university and might have gotten our lab in trouble. What confuses me is why was this family there in the first place? I mean, they came there one time for who knows what reason. I guess maybe they were saying to use the bathroom, maybe that was legit, but why come back a second time? Did they just want to cause more trouble? Did this guy hear about moringa trees and was like, I really want to know what moringa trees are? Walks in, is like, yeah, nice moringa tree, but it looks a bit sick. Yeah, that's not a moringa tree. Moringa. I learned to say moringa from Google. In fact, if I pronounce something correctly that seems like, how did he know how to pronounce that? It's usually because I Google it. Just a pro tip.
Submit your story to be read on the channel at voiceyherestories@gmail.com and join our Voicey veteran community at r/VoiceyHere. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode. Alright, Voicey veterans, I'll see you in the next one.